titles whereby the evenings are characterized seldom match the content. So if you notice that, then be aware that this is a normal procedure and not a mistake. You see, when mistakes become every day, then we are really where we ought to be, because then we can get away with anything. So we sort of hope about that. So what I really meant in the titles that we assigned to this evening was the evaluation from our point of view of the Nag Hammadi scriptures, not just those of St. Thomas, which perhaps has become, with the Gospel of Thomas, the most popular of the Nag Hammadi writings, but it is really to be seen in a much wider manner. In that respect, it occurred to me that it might be useful, although probably also boring to some, to receive a little bit of information on a largely, in this case, on a largely reminiscing basis, or rather than any other way, about Nag Hammadi scriptures. So I designed a little introductory passage here, which really answers the question which nobody asked, and I hope nobody will ask, namely, how did you contact the Nag Hammadi scriptures? And since it's rather different from the manner in which other people have done the same thing, I thought that I will inject it here for your entertainment and possibly for your boredom. So that's really very largely up to you. So what we are speaking of are my school years in Innsbruck, Austria, which was subsequent, obviously, to my departure from communist Hungary. I was attending the university there, and among the various other experiences of an interesting nature, one that I encountered there was an elderly gentleman of clerical provenance who had formerly been a Jesuit father, but who left the Jesuit order but was still an active priest, and who conducted some classes here in the Hungarian in religion to us. A very dignified and very interesting gentleman. The manner of meeting him I will not bore you with, because I'm boring you with enough other things, or at least so I hope. So this gentleman, whom I had sworn on oath, formal oath with a crucifix and candles, that I would never reveal his name. For the reasons for that really don't matter, and so for that reason I obviously will not reveal his name. He appears in the introductory part, the first chapters of my book, The Gnostic Jung, as Professor J, which he was a full professor at Budapest University, and then taught some classes at Innsbruck University. So in any event, he's long gone. He died in '56. A little bit difficult for me to talk about because I was a very good friend of his. He died in consequence, so I was informed, he died in consequence of the failed 1956 uprising of the Hungarians against the communists. So not that he was killed, but he had a heart attack. By then he was working for the Voice of America out of Vienna, and then the Viennese people there from the Hungarian program told me that Professor J had passed away. Anyway, a most interesting gentleman who had been extremely helpful to me, particularly, let's say, in a spiritual manner, because for some reason, almost as soon as I met him, I felt that he was somebody whom you could confide in. There are little additional elements. I really met him because of a very frail old lady at the time, who was a famous Hungarian writer, particularly for youth, and whom he was tremendously devoted to. And so we both, my cousin and I, who was also going to school there, went in to her sick room, and there we found Professor J. And since we, and maybe particularly I, hit it off with the ailing old lady quite a bit, so he liked us greatly. She was so happy to see us. From then on, about every day I would stop in there, and this relationship with the lady whom he was so close to really brought me close to the professor. And he had been a full professor at Budapest University before escaping. Very, very interesting man, but for reasons of his own, he did not want me to mention him in public. Now, that is a good introduction. Now, what happened was that I had some business to transact in the eternal city of Rome, where my friend had just visited, and so I was getting ready to go there, and then I said to Professor J, well, you know, I'm going, and explained to him what was going on and that I had to go to Rome. He said, you know, a couple of things. One being that if you go to Rome, he knew why I was going, that if you go to Rome, to the seminary where I was already, had applied, and I was actually enrolled, Collegio Germanico Hungaricum, which is the old German-Hungarian seminary that was set up during the Austro-Hungarian Empire. There was a, I don't know how it is now, but there was another German language seminary which was financed from the German Reich, and that one was far less, let's say, reputable, because its prefect was a bishop who was reputed to have been a Nazi. Now, there was never really any proof of that, but a lot of people held the rumor against him. What happened was that then when the Nazis fell, and this was of course at the time when the Nazis fell, then Then he was smuggling or promoting the smuggling of Nazis or so-called Nazis out of Europe to South America. And I know I discussed it with him, and he said, well, before that I was helping the people who needed help, and now I am helping the people who need help too. And if anybody doesn't like that, that's their problem. And so he was not involved in the partisanship of World War II, but let's see, my interaction with him was very little. But now what happened was that I, for personal business of my own, had to go to Rome in order to confer with Father Forspel, who was a Jesuit and the prefect of the German-Hungarian seminary, the old Austro-Hungarian seminary. And so Professor J decided to come with me, and he did. And it was a very interesting experience of a few days. First of all, I arrived and they welcomed me and showed me my room and various things like that. And then a seminarian, that particular seminary in Rome, the students all wear fiery red cassocks on the streets and everywhere. Their nickname in French by the French seminarians was les punaises, and the punaise is a bed bug. And bed bugs are red, but they are also known for other unpleasant habits, shall we say. In any event, so that one of the red cassock seminarians came out and said, you have to come with us tonight because there's a big ceremony at St. Peter's, and the Pope will be there. That was Pius XII at that time, and it should really be very pleasing to you. He was actually somebody who knew me slightly. So I said, sure, just tell me when to go and we'll go. And it was a remarkable experience in night with St. Peter's being lit entirely by candles, the front great big gates being closed, and then all of a sudden the silver, this was probably around 11 o'clock at night, the silver trumpets sound and the gates open, and floating above the crowd in the Sedis Gestatoria, that frail, white-clad figure of Pius XII, who looked like a messenger of heaven, and I think who was it too. For one thing, you got to honor a pope who speaks perfect Hungarian. I don't think there was one, has there been one since the Middle Ages, but Pius did. So coming in with the Swiss Guard and the Noble Guard and the cardinals and the Monsignori and maybe about 100 altar boys, they marched into the vast cavern of St. Peter's. They took the Pope over to the high altar and made him descend, and then the ceremony began. And I have not seen face-to-face any pope by that time, although Pope Pius, His Holiness, as a cardinal, as Cardinal Pacelli, had been to Budapest just a few, probably not even quite a year earlier, because the Eucharistic Congress, one of these kind of big Catholic hootenannies, took place in Budapest that year, and he was the cardinal legate, Cardinal Pacelli from Rome, representing Pius XI, but a couple of months after that event concluded, Pius XI passed away, and Cardinal Pacelli was elected Pope. I even remember, I can tell you all kinds of intimate things here, because I know that, first of all, that they are not really actionable, and therefore if you denounce me, it's not going to do me any harm, and secondly, because I also like to brag a little here and there. So you'll get some of it tonight. So in any event, I was a little kid. I mean, heck, this was I was born in 31. I'm going to have if I live that long, I'm going to have my 93rd. Or do I have my 93rd birthday already? Anybody know? Well,
you're going to be 94.
94. So this is going to be the 94th. Yeah. So in any event, my father walked into my bedroom and said, "All right, son, who is going to be the next pope?" And I was just a little tyke. I popped up in bed and I yelled, "Pacelli!" And of course it was. So that was my entry into the field of predictive prophecy, let us say. But anyway, there he was, by then fully crowned and sublimely, inspiringly beautiful in his entry to St. Peter's. Now, this really has rather little to do with what I am about to tell you later, because I neglected to mention at the outset that my good friend Professor J had decided to come to Rome with me. We didn't travel on the train all the way. Those Mussolini trains were not running all that well. But in any event, he did come to Rome, he met me there, and he knew, of course, his former fellow Jesuits at the seminary and so on. And we went up there together, and he introduced me, and all kinds of nice things. So anyway, he was there, and he indicated that he had some further interesting things to say to me. So before we went back to the seminary, he said, because he knew that I was of the whole Hungarian community in Innsbruck, I was the Gnostic. I went to church and all that, but they knew that was my specialty. And so he said, in your field of interest, there are some developments that you will be very, very, very happy about. And he said, well, what are they, Father John? And he said, what they are, some time ago they found some scriptures in Upper Egypt which are all of a Gnostic nature and which now are laboriously being deciphered. But you might get a look at them. I'll go with you to the Vatican archives to show you what it is that they found. Oh, I said, no, that's going to be really great. Well, it was although when the scriptures were open to us, I soon became aware that I was faced with some linguistic mystery, because well, I knew already, I had 2 years Greek by then and so forth, so I knew the Greek alphabet, but not much more than that. So there were a bunch of, well, primitive books, by which I mean is that they looked, and they really are, according to the scribes, probably the first writings in book form, or that resembles our book writing in the world. And they were obviously the Nag Hammadi books. Now, what they were and what they are, I think they sent them back to Egypt, which I think is a crime. I wouldn't send anything to Egypt at the present time. They'll steal it, they'll sell it, they'll mess it up. You know, that's the way things are done around there nowadays. No, earlier on, maybe not, but not now. So in any event, they are Greek letters. The writings are in Greek letters. But when I tried to read the Greek with my couple of years of Greek, I couldn't read them, because in addition to the alphabetic problem, we also had another problem, namely that they were in another language. Not in the Greek language, not in the Latin language, not in any modern language, but, as a good professor whispered into my ear, they are Coptic. And Coptic, of course, the language of the ancient inhabitants, really, of Egypt, not the hieroglyphs anymore, but having an alphabet, having a grammar, and all of that. There are and there were scholars of Coptic around already, and they were working on the deciphering and translating of these scriptures already. And the first one, which Professor picked up from the table and held it up to me, because there was no one else with us there, held it up to me, said, "Look," he says, "this is the Gospel of Thomas." And I said, So then, let's say, they, for only a few hours, they released these scriptures to us, so we were playing with them. But then neither of us knew Coptic, so it was a very laborious process. But we corralled on one of the student seminarians, and he came over and he was translating some passages to us, and we were just very, very joyful as the result. So that was, at least to my googly eyes, my googly Hungarian eyes, my first encounter with the Nag Hammadi library, and at the Nag Hammadi library with the Gospel of Thomas. And I am not going to go into too many details there, because let's say I felt, and I still feel, that I had some premonitions that some very important documents had been discovered, and that they were already, or at least copies of them were already at the Vatican, and that this is a very important situation that had developed. So I was quite excited because of my previous encounter with the subject. Not that I knew any Coptic, I still don't, but I knew some Greek. And the interesting thing, of course, with the Coptic materials is that when you find, or you come across some of them, they are in Greek letters, but in the Coptic language. That's the way it is. Because after Alexander the Great, the scholarly inhabitants of Alexandria, and there were all people who knew Greek, and in fact Greek was the lingua franca by that time. Not Latin was the bureaucratic language in those parts of the Middle East which were actively occupied by the Romans, including Palestine. The word Palestine is of Roman origin, so when Palestinia, so that when people are running around with these non-existent Palestinian flags and demonstrating and things like that, then they need to be informed that they are reviving the nomenclature of the Roman Empire, because Titus, the Emperor Titus, his son, Titus was the son of a previous emperor. These were all the Romans who took over Palestine, and therefore the Latin language came to be involved to some extent in the Dead Sea Scrolls, number of the scriptures around there, because this was the Roman language. So that also has to be kept in mind. Now then, in any event, so I looked at this. We asked the young Coptic scholar, what does it say? Well, he says, it looks to me that it says that it contains sayings of Jesus. With each one of the paragraphs starts with Jesus said, Jesus said, Jesus said. And I think some attached booklet or something like that said, and Didymus Judas Thomas wrote. Didymus Judas Thomas being the Apostle Thomas. A very interesting figure who, and this is really necessary to tell, because let's say Didymus Judas Thomas was well known to biblical scholarship for many hundreds of years. But this book, which actually had the title of the Gospel of Thomas, this scripture had not been known, except that quite a few years before, in the 1920s, in another part of Upper Egypt, people discovered in the riverbed some scripture, and these were these were, as it turned out to be now subsequently, these were some of the sayings in the Gospel of Thomas, which had been apparently detached from the main body of the scriptures and were hidden somewhere else. They were hidden in a riverbed. So a small portion, a very small portion of the Gospel according to Thomas had been available already. And it will come to me that it is usually referred to, it's referred to by the name of the river where it was found. So if all of a sudden I pop up and says, I got it, then it will see what it is. In any event, small portion of the complete Gospel of Thomas, which was found now, had been available earlier, but nobody knew where it came from, nobody knew what it was a part of. But in any event, there was a relationship to a small earlier find. Now, that being the case, we held in our hands the scripture, which by its own title, in this case, has no disguise, no playing around with names and so forth, but the entire book. And the reason I call them books, because these they are, according to the bibliographers, probably, unless they find some more, these are the first scriptures in book form. What happens is they are papyrus, which was produced in Egypt, the original form of paper, made out of reeds, and then written on papyrus pages, and the pages laid on top of each other, and then when they had enough, then they were tied together with usually a leather tie, something like a shoelace, and the title written on top of them, and they had the book. So up to that time you had scrolls. That's why the Dead Sea Scrolls are still scrolls. But the Nag Hammadi manuscripts are volumes, codices, because that primitive form of bookbinding came to be called a codex. Now that's of Latin origin. And for clear up till I think the invention of the printing press, the literature for schools, for the church and so forth, was written on codices, the plural of codex. Now, anyway, the authorship, or at least quasi-authorship of this particular scripture was attributed by the book itself to Didymos Judas Thomas. Didymos in Greek means the twin. And so Saint Thomas the Apostle, who appears in the New Testament and who has been really very famous for a long time, was referred to as Thomas the Twin. The secret of this nomenclature has never been really revealed, and people now feel that what it indicates is that in his lifetime, Jesus and Thomas were considered as twin brothers. Now you have to, of course, keep in mind that not all that gold glitters, and not every twin brother who is called that really is. So that what very often an emotional or spiritual relationship of two people who were very friendly with each other and so forth, was considered as making them brothers, really brothers. And often, if this brotherhood was very, very close, then even twin brothers. And so it is generally assumed now that Thomas was considered in his own day so close to Jesus that he was officially called Jesus' twin. Not for physical reasons. Nobody ever had two babies in Bethlehem, as far as we can discern, but that their relationship in the spirit was so close that they were regarded that as two of the same material and therefore twins. Now, Thomas the twin, I don't know whether the name twin or the adjective twin was always there or not, but let's say Thomas, Judas Thomas, was also very highly regarded apparently in apostolic times, and there were other writings which are not part of the Nag Hammadi material and which may or may not have been originally written by the Apostle Thomas are also extant. A whole collection of these is known as the Acts of Thomas, because Acts were, they're like the Acts of the Apostles. Acts were a term used to describe, when you were describing, well, this is a book about what he did. If you write something I don't know about the acts of somebody else, this is what he was doing. These are his actions. And there's a whole bunch of those. And in them is one of the most lyrically beautiful and inspiring acts, a long poem, which is usually known as what is it called? What is it called?
Song of the Pearl.
It's no. Have heaven's sakes, at almost 94, these things are forgivable, but it is the hymn of the pearl. Yeah, has other names. So the hymn of the pearl is contained in one of them, and it has been popular in all kinds of Christian circles for a long time. And so when this came up, well, all right, so Thomas was really a heretic. But look, for hundreds of years we were reading his other book, the poem, the hymn of the pearl. So is that a heretical book too? And the places where they read these books regularly was in the monasteries. A usual monastery routine is that the monks assemble. This is still done, I'm sure, at least it was a few years ago. The monks assemble in the refectory for their meal. And there is usually a kind of a dais where the abbot and the various other prominent monks sit, and the reader. And then whatever has been ordained for the day, the reader reads during the meal. It is not permissible to eat without reading. I guess they felt that if you are going to take physical nourishment, you might as well take mental nourishment at the same time. And so it is that kind of a literature that the Hymn of the Pearl consisted of, and was apparently very important and very popular, and not without good reason, because it is a singularly beautiful piece of writing. Probably the easiest way to get hold of it, if you want to read it, is in the book Gnosticism by Hans Jonas, the German Gnostic scholar, who made his own translation of the Hymn of the Pearl, and he reproduced it completely. So if you want a complete reproduction in a rather cheap edition, there are many other things in that book, but it's definitely there. So people knew the Hymn of the Pearl, which is taken from the Acts of Thomas. So people knew that Thomas was a very important person. And according to the legend, he was martyred in India, and the Hymn of the Pearl is entitled "The Song which the Holy Apostle Thomas sang in the Indies, in India," because that was the tradition that after Jesus' ascension and so forth, that Thomas took off for a missionary trip to India. Well, maybe he was interested in yoga, I don't know. But in any event, he goes to India, and this all is described in a metrically organized poem, a very beautiful poem, which indicates all the experiences, all the adventures that he has, until at the end, after he has landed in southern India, he gets into some trouble with the local Maharaja, and is ultimately executed. And there is a mountain, not very big mountain, with a big cave in it, just outside of the Theosophical Society, outside of Madras, which is called St. Thomas Mountain, and according to tradition, that is where he was buried. And Roberta and I, had several conversations at the time of the Parliament of Religions in Chicago with the Syrian Orthodox Archbishop of Bombay, Mark Gregorius, very wonderful old gentleman, and he said that there's absolutely no doubt about it that St. Thomas had been there, and that his church returned the body subsequently because the patriarch of the Syrian Orthodox Church back in the Middle East demanded it. He said, well, we are the church of St. Thomas, and you guys were only you were a mission of St. Thomas, but we are the original, we are the home church, and you got to send it back. And I said, well, all right, we sent it back. But he also said to us, with a smile, but that also means that we had, and we kept it all along, we had the original Gospel of Thomas. In other words, the Gospel of Thomas existed, and St. Thomas took it with him to India. And so when he died there, then it was there, and the church had it for quite a while, and then eventually they sent that back to Beth. He says, well, we have a copy of it, we have a copy of it, and he was smiling as he got into the elevator. Everything interesting in that meeting in Chicago occurred in the elevator. people got in the elevator, people got out of the elevator, but the elevator was always involved. In any event, this now kind of wanders from the subject a little, but let's say that there is proof of the existence and of the travels and ultimately perhaps of the death and burial and then the transfer of his body of Saint Thomas from India. And so Thomas was known. And this was sort of like somebody explained to me, this was like monastic enjoyable reading. When the monks wanted a good story, nicely written, good poetry, then they read or had read to them what did they call it? That's difficulties. So what did I call it? What is it?
Hymn.
Hymn. Yeah, it's the song or the hymn of the pearl. That's it. Because it's a long symbolic poem in which a transcendental being, some angelic being in the heaven worlds is given the commission of going down to earth and finding there a pearl, which is in a sea, in a deep sea, and is guarded by a roaring serpent or a dragon. After all, dragons and serpents are related to each other. And that he has to get hold of that jewel, that pearl, bring it back to the heavenly kingdom and return it to his celestial parents. And that's his job. And now, since it's a very nice, very lovely, enjoyable poetic work, so no doubt all the monks read it and read it to each other and maybe to the civilian people as well. And so Thomas was quite well known. There are also some others, other really mystical adventure of Thomas, which occurs in the Acts of Thomas earlier than his Indian captivity, which is usually referred to as the wedding song of wisdom. And if you find, I think that it also, or much of it is reproduced by Hans Jonas. I am mentioning these things because these are the cheaper literature that you can get. And to have a really beautiful piece of writing and not to have to pay a lot of money for it, that's a good combination. In any event, that is full of symbolism and all kinds of beautiful sort of spiritual wedding, and that occurs in the story earlier, before he gets to India, probably somewhere around in the Middle East, where he stops with the ship, and then he wanders around because he has time on his hands, and a girl in the streets tells him, "Look, you look like an interesting stranger who would like to hear some or see some beautiful things. Why don't you come to this wedding that we are having tonight?" And so then he goes with her. It's not her wedding, but of her mistress. That is also very beautifully done. So in any event, Thomas was well known. Also on the negative side, in the Acts of the Apostles, and so there he has sort of a bit of a bad name, because when Jesus appears after the resurrection, then in the canonical Bible, Thomas wants to make sure that this is the real Jesus, and then he sticks his finger into Jesus' wounds and things of that sort, which I'm sure is not terribly pleasant for Jesus. However, let's say he's held up as the staunch non-believer you have to show him. We always looked in school, and then Thomas says, you really had to show him, otherwise he wouldn't believe it. But that there are other more mysterious and more esoteric things involved, and if he was so close to Jesus that they called him his twin, I would say that if my twin had been crucified and taken off the cross and is walking around now, I would probably be very happy and I would recognize him right away. But it's differently portrayed in the Acts of the Apostles. But in any event, let us say Thomas was very well known. Now, there have been accounts and rumors for a long time circulating in the Middle East that there was a Gospel of Thomas, not just the Acts of the Apostles with the reference to Thomas, but that there was a Gospel of Thomas, and that various people, mostly people honored with the unpleasant name of heretic, were reading that Gospel of Thomas. And that in some of the churches, like the Nestorian Church of the East and others, the Gospel of Thomas was considered canonical. Similarly, which means to be in the book. The canon is the book. So when you say something is a canonical scripture, it's a really authoritative scripture that could be put in the book. That's how it was, let's say, classified. And then a big religion, which is, at least some of its writings and story are known to some of us because it's very closely tied to the Gnostic tradition, the Manichaean tradition. Allegedly, the Manichaeans in various, and they were all over the place. They were in China, they were in India, all kinds of places. And that they used a gospel that was called the Gospel according to Thomas. So there is precedent for the Gospel of Thomas, let us say. Now, that being the case, what about Nag Hammadi in general? I think we can say now with some assurance that the Nag Hammadi find, the find of the Nag Hammadi library, it's usually referred to as a library because there are so many books in it. When you only find a couple of books, then you can say, well, that's it. But this is really a very big collection of books. That the Nag Hammadi library, and within it, the Gospel according to Thomas, are probably the most powerful, the most revealing find of biblical scholarship for, I would say, 1,500 years, 2,000 years, and really the discipline of biblical scholarship was stood on end by this find, and they have been, the biblical scholars have been working on those Nag Hammadi books ever since they were discovered. But the pioneering book, the book that everybody should read, and that really made us so excited and happy, is this. This is the book called the Gnostic Gospels by Elaine Pagels, the biblical scholar of Princeton, whose work, I think, requires eternal thanks, and who has really stood as the pioneer of Gnostic biblical scholarship ever since. She's a very, very nice lady. I heard one of her first lectures that she gave before the book ever came out in Claremont, and we all said, well, geez, are you sure that this is not one of the college students? Because she looked extremely youthful, with the long hair that young girls were wearing in the 70s and the 50s. They used to iron their hair, you know. And long hair was very much in. So that's what she wore, and she was extremely nice and extremely learned person, who probably had done more than anyone else to make the Nag Hammadi scriptures popular, even as Professor Gilles Crispel from Holland was one of the greatest early publicizers in Europe, and so Elaine Pagels was the one who publicized and translated and commented upon the Nag Hammadi corpus all over the world. So she really has a very great merit in this regard. Did her commentaries and translations do justice to the material? You know what? I don't think there is the living soul in the world that could give justice to that material. So everybody has done what they could, not the least of whom was Dr. Robinson of Claremont, Dr. James Robinson, who was a good friend of ours, came to us many times, and others, and certainly Elaine Pagels. But let's say it was an immense work, and then the commentaries on them, the exegesis, as we call it, was even more complicated and difficult. But let's say all of a sudden, beginning in the, I think it would be right to say in the mid and the late 70s, there was a renaissance of interest in Gnostic scriptures and in the spirit that motivated them, which in many ways is still with us. So the Nag Hammadi find is the most important find of biblical archaeology, maybe in as much as a couple of thousand years. And it has produced a level of interest, I think, of a very, very great nature and very important nature. it is also known that Elaine Pagels has, she suffered quite a bit. Her little son died with some kind of wasting disease early in life, or still as a child. She had no other children. And her husband, who was another academic, a physicist, Professor Helmut Pagels, had perished in the Colorado mountains by falling off the mountain into the whatever you call it. In any event, she lost both her husband and her child in tragic fashion. But with all of that had produced a tremendous amount of literature, and a big question arose right away, both pro and con. Was Elaine Pagels sympathetic to the Gnostics? Because that was considered for a couple of thousand years a disreputable thing to do. So if you are now sitting next to some Gnostics here and you are sympathetic to them, that shows that you're a bad person. Now you've got to remember that was the attitude all along. So she had the courage and the perseverance to start something that is still with us, and that is a tremendous amount of interest, both, how should we put it, both academic and literary in the world, in the Gnostic tradition, on the basis of the Gnostic library of Nag Hammadi. So without Nag Hammadi, the ability to deal with Gnostic materials would be still as minimal as it has been for nearly 2,000 years. But with this, we have a material now that is of very great importance and interest, and that will continue to feed the interest of studious people in the future, and see to it that after all this time, the Gnostic tradition will not be lost. Without the Nag Hammadi library, we all would be greatly, very greatly impoverished. But with it, we have material into which, sort of, if you don't mind me using that Draculesque phrase, since then we've got something to sink our teeth into. Dracula had invented. Professor Dracula of Bucharest, you see. Although I don't think there was a Bucharest yet when Dracula was writing about. But in any event, let's say it has really picked up the interest in and the willingness to interpret and to speculate about the various documents of the Gnostic tradition that otherwise would never have appeared. Look at what happened to Hermeticism, for instance, and the Hermetic materials, the Corpus Hermeticum, which has been beautifully translated, for instance, by G.R.S. Mead in the 19th century, is wonderful insight-producing material, but it has been, for all intents and purposes, forgotten. But Nag Hammadi is not forgotten. So the prophetic statements of my old clerical friend amid the Alps of the Tyrol in Austria, to the effect that this is going to do it. This is going to bring back interest in the Gnosis. And he said to me personally, if anything is going to make you, this is going to make it. So concentrate on this as much as you can, and you are going to be one of the most important people who can bring Gnosticism back to the West. Now, the reason I'm doing all this long hullabaloo here is because something brought that prediction to my mind. Was it today? Was it yesterday? Anyway, when I was talking to my doctor friend Lance Owens in Salt Lake City, because this October there is a big conference in London which is based entirely on the study and the understanding of the 7 sermons to the dead. The Gnostic or Gnosticizing mysterious treatise that Jung authored under inspiration, and that somebody else whom you are looking at now decided to write a book about, called The Gnostic Jung and the 7 Sermons to the Dead, and I was assisted in that task by Dr. Lance Owens, who is going over there and who will keep saying that he will represent both himself and myself. And I said, go ahead, do the representing. So in any event, if you want to hear our names, Hoeller and Owens, mentioned in London next October, then you should fly over. We can tell you where to go. It's going to be apparently a fabulous event, but unfortunately it will be available to me only in movie strips and things of that sort, because it's very difficult for me to travel that distance at the present time. However, I will have a very reliable, good friend there in Dr. Lance Owens, he said that he promised me, he can't promise me immediately, but promised me that he is going to come here and give us an account of the conference. And the conference about the contribution of Hoeller and Owens. I said, you do that, buddy, and that will really be great. Because, we should never exclude, but at the same time we should also not exaggerate inspiration. When you get increasingly fired up about something, when you feel that you have to get out of bed and write every night for weeks and weeks, for months and months, and things of that sort. And when you feel that this is important, that is what happened to me when writing the Gnostic Jung. And then, of course, we wrote more material, commentary type material later. But that book was, there was somebody or something there pushing me every night. And of course, I was using my old manual typewriter. I usually use the firm, which was a Royal, an old Royal typewriter that previously belonged to Columbia Studios. Now, how I came by that old typewriter, I won't tell you. But every night there I was, and my neighbors, I live in a small apartment, my neighbors were fit to be tied. Fit to be tied. Because especially with a manual typewriter, you can really create quite a bit of noise. But what worry is noise when we have gnosis in front of us? And not only gnosis, but gnosis by Carl Jung. And that's the greatest combination of mystical talent, I think, over the years, and I am greatly honored and grateful that it came to me, that the inspiration was there, and that it started a whole field of study, which is Jung and Gnosticism. And that's what this conference in London is taking care of. And I think probably one of the main instigators was Dr. Sonu Shamdasamy, who is the editor of the Red Book, and who was here and who knows us, and who felt that this entire linkage between the consciousness of the linkage between classical Gnosticism and Carl Jung is an extremely important discovery. See, Shamdasani is very interesting. Obviously, he's from a family from India. His family moved to England from India, and then he was a young man, in college. He was going to go back to India to find his guru. And meanwhile, to get some reading material, he picked up in some bookstore, I think on the way to the airport, The Secret of the Golden Flower by Carl Jung and Carl Kerényi. Carl Kerényi, the great Hungarian scholar of mythology, whom I drank champagne with him at my father's house. So it cannot be, because Dr. Kerényi and his wife Magda saw how everything was going awry in Hungary, and then they went to Switzerland. In Switzerland they met Jung, and then a wonderful collaboration of all kinds of mythological material developed. And I remember, I never thought, I was really small, maybe 12 years old or something. So I asked my father, what happened to Uncle Carl? And my father said, Uncle Carl had to go to Switzerland. It will probably be a long time before we see him again, but and of course he remained there until the 50s. But in any event, why did I bring that up? Because that is the book that Dr. Shamdasani picked up, and he read it, and he said, Jung, I found my guru, this is the one. I don't have to go anywhere, I don't have to go to India, it's right here. Now, there's a personal aspect to this also, which I am not going to keep from you. And that is this, that a number of years before that, no, maybe not. But in any event, in the early, let's say, I got in the late 1950s and thereabouts, somebody gave me a copy of The Secret of the Golden Flower. And it was symbolic of a very great experience of my life. And there again, I mean, you know, I'm not Chinese, and I'm not even a sinologist. You know what a sinologist is? A scholar of Chinese things. I only turn into a sinologist if I find a good Chinese restaurant. So you should tell me about it, you know. But let's say, you know, it was one of those aha moments. The lights lit up on Franklin Avenue while I was opening up The Secret of the Golden Flower, which was Jung's, it was an ancient Chinese, it was in ancient Chinese scripture, of a kind of, you might even call it as a kind of a Chinese word, yoga. But let's say, it is a book of Chinese gnosis, and it is evident that anybody who would become so excited about that Chinese work and work with it like Jung did with, of course, Kerin's help, was a true transnational Gnostic. And I said, that's what Jung is. And so I pursued it ever since, and I still do. I think the greatest Gnostic teacher of modern times, or maybe even postmodern times, Carl Gustav Jung. May he find the terrain to his liking and to his further enlightenment whenever he is. Now, these were, Jung was the second step. The first step was the Nag Hammadi library itself, and who knows what we may discover with. Because if you look at the discovery of obscure and yet valuable writings, you find that it hardly ever is just one discovery. But then comes something else, and then comes something else. It rounds out the situation. It fills up the globe of wisdom. And then the understanding, the knowledge, the real transcendental gnosis can take place. Now, I am hoping to be still here next Friday, and then I'll follow some suggestions as to how the gnosis could be further facilitated to enter this weird archonic culture, if you want to use a Greek term, and even as the gnosis itself was designed to transform people, so humanity, by and by, one, could be transformed if enough attention is paid to this tradition. And that is, in order to facilitate that, that is why Blavatsky came here into this world and brought her own gnosis. And now we can go on from there. And I think a very valuable and very promising historical period, inspirited by gnosis, may very well arise out of this and may change. People always, oh, I want to change the world, I want to change the world. You know what, buddy? Change yourself, you Dummkopf. Because otherwise you wouldn't say that. But if you are able to collaborate, let's put it that way, with a Gnostic change, a Gnostic transformation of your own, then I think we are on our way. And I dearly hope and pray, because I'm one of these people who doesn't meditate, I pray. That's how I was raised, that's how my parents were raised, that's how my grandparents were raised, and it works for me. Why should I exchange it for something that doesn't work? But let us say we may have, Dr. Lance Owens and I, we may have contributed, at least Dr. Shamdasan thinks so, we may have contributed something valuable to the rediscovery, or in this case the discovery, of the modern psychologist, the modern the modern enterer into the soul, with the old discoverers of the soul. And maybe this might do something to the culture that it tremendously needs, and without which it looks, at least to me, without which it literally is going nowhere. If you want it to go somewhere, bring it more gnosis. We old timers have done our share, but you still have to do your share, and others. Gnosis, gnosis, gnosis. And it has worked 2,000 years ago, it has worked a few years ago, it will work now. And in so doing, I think we will have done what Carl Jung wanted to do, what Blavatsky wanted to do, and what all of them accomplished in doing to a certain extent. It just needs a little more push. It needs a little more attention. It needs a little more understanding to go forward on the path of transformation. And it will be here, and the world itself will be transformed because you and I will be transformed. Thank you very much. There are private affairs, but let's say, first of all, Professor Jason said, he said, if anybody can revive Gnosticism, you will be the one. Keep working on it, for heaven's sake. And God bless him wherever he is.